My dog eats better than your kids.
What happens when a billionaire's daughter walks into Judge Judy's courtroom wearing a custom Versace gown and tells a 55-year-old immigrant seamstress that her hands are only good for making cheap knockoffs that belong in a garbage dump? This isn't just another case about unpaid bills. This is the story of Victoria Ashford, the 28-year-old Instagram influencer with 3.2 million followers, daughter of real estate tycoon Charles Ashford, who thought her family's billions could silence a woman who had spent 8 months sewing her dreams into existence, stitch by painful stitch. The video of what happened inside that courtroom would shatter every illusion Victoria had ever built about herself. It would expose secrets so dark, so twisted, that even her own father would struggle to look at her the same way again. And the woman sitting in the back row of that courtroom, the one nobody recognized at first, would deliver a revelation that would bring Victoria Ashford to her knees in a way no lawsuit, no judgment, no public humiliation ever could. Because that woman was Victoria's own mother. And she had been waiting 28 years for this exact moment. Elena Rodriguez arrived in America in 1992 with $17, a sewing machine her grandmother had given her, and a dream that felt impossible but burned bright enough to keep her walking when her feet bled through worn shoes. She didn't speak English. She didn't know anyone. She slept in a church basement for 3 months, sewing clothes for neighbors who paid her in food and kindness. 32 years later, Elena owned a small tailoring shop in downtown Los Angeles. It wasn't fancy. The sign outside was hand-painted, the floors creaked when you walked, and the ceiling fan made a clicking sound that Elena had learned to love like a heartbeat. But every dress that left her shop carried something money couldn't buy. It carried her soul, her story, her survival sewn into every hem. Victoria Ashford found Elena's shop the way rich people always find hidden treasures, through the help. One of Victoria's housekeepers mentioned that her cousin knew a seamstress who could make any designer dress for a fraction of the price. Victoria, who had just launched her influencer brand called Ashford Elegance, saw an opportunity. She didn't want to pay designer prices. She wanted designer quality at sweatshop costs. And she wanted someone desperate enough to work around the clock without asking questions. The first meeting happened on a Tuesday morning in March. Victoria walked into Elena's modest shop wearing sunglasses that cost more than Elena's monthly rent. She looked around with visible distaste, running a manicured finger along a fabric rack and examining her fingertip for dust. Elena offered her tea. Victoria declined without making eye contact. The proposal was simple. Victoria needed 47 custom dresses for her online boutique's launch. They had to be indistinguishable from high-end designers. Chanel silhouettes, Dior elegance, Valentino drama. But they couldn't carry those labels because that would be counterfeiting. They would carry Victoria's own label instead. Ashford Elegance. Original designs inspired by the greats. The price Victoria offered was insultingly low. $23,000 for 47 dresses. That worked out to roughly $480 per dress. Dresses that would take Elena 8 to 12 hours each to complete. Dresses that required premium fabrics, precise tailoring, and the kind of attention to detail that separated art from assembly line production. Elena hesitated. The number didn't add up, but her shop had been struggling. The pandemic had kept customers away, and the big chains were undercutting small seamstresses on basic alterations. This contract could save her business. It could pay off the second mortgage she had taken to keep her doors open. It could give her breathing room for the first time in 3 years. She asked for $30,000. Victoria laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was sharp and cold, like ice cracking. $23,000. And that's generous considering I'm giving you exposure. Do you know how many followers I have? When people see my brand, they're going to want to know who made these dresses. I'll tag your little shop. The business that will bring you is worth more than the difference you're asking for. Elena signed the contract that afternoon. She told herself it was a business decision. She told herself the exposure would be worth it. She told herself that this was how opportunities worked in America. You took chances. You trusted people. You believed that hard work would be rewarded. She was wrong about all of it. For the next 8 months, Elena's life became those 47 dresses. She woke at 4 in the morning and sewed until midnight. Her eyes burned from close work under inadequate lighting. Her fingers cramped so badly some nights that she couldn't close them into fists. She turned away other customers because Victoria demanded exclusivity. She spent $14,000 of her own money on premium fabrics because Victoria rejected the materials included in the budget, demanding higher quality without adjusting the price. The dresses were masterpieces. Every one of them. Elena poured 32 years of expertise into those garments. She hand-stitched beading that machines couldn't replicate. She created structural elements that made bodies look like works of art. She stayed true to the designer inspirations while adding her own touches that elevated each piece into something unique. When Victoria came to pick up the final batch, she brought a photographer. Elena thought the photos were for the brand launch. She posed shyly next to her creations, proud of what she had accomplished. Hopeful that this partnership would lead to more opportunities. That was the last day. Elena felt hopeful about anything involving Victoria Ashford. 3 weeks passed. No payment arrived. Elena called Victoria's office and was told that Miss Ashford was traveling and would respond when she returned. Another week passed. More calls. More excuses. Victoria's assistant finally answered directly and informed Elena that there was a problem with the merchandise and that Victoria was considering legal action for substandard work. Elena's blood ran cold. She went to Victoria's office in person, carrying samples of her work, documentation of every communication, every specification Victoria had approved. She was stopped in the lobby by security guards who told her that Miss Ashford had left instructions that Elena was not to enter the building under any circumstances. Elena stood on that sidewalk, 62 years old, holding evidence of 8 months of labor, and realized she had been played. She had been used. And the woman who had taken everything from her was probably laughing about it somewhere behind those glass windows. But Elena Rodriguez didn't survive 32 years in America by giving up when powerful people tried to break her. She did what Victoria never expected. She hired a lawyer. She filed a lawsuit. And when Victoria's legal team tried to bury her in motions and delays, Elena did something even braver. She agreed to settle this in Judge Judy's courtroom on national television, where Victoria Ashford's billions couldn't buy silence. The day of the trial, Elena arrived an hour early. She sat in the front row, wearing a dress she had made herself, the same style she had been creating for 40 years. Simple, elegant, made with hands that knew the value of honest work. She carried a folder with every receipt, every email, every photo of the dresses she had created, and she carried something else. A quiet determination that Victoria Ashford had never encountered in her entire privileged life. Asterisk. Victoria Ashford arrived at the courtroom in a convoy that would have been appropriate for a head of state. 2 black SUVs, a personal security guard, an assistant carrying a leather portfolio that probably contained notes on how to appear sympathetic in front of cameras, and a lawyer whose hourly rate exceeded Elena's monthly income. The first thing Judge Judy noticed was Victoria's shoes. Custom Giuseppe Zanotti heels with crystal embellishments that caught the courtroom light with every step. Shoes that cost approximately $12,000. Shoes that Victoria had posted about on Instagram just 3 days earlier with the caption, "Treating myself because I deserve it." Victoria sat down at the defendant's table with the confidence of someone who had never lost at anything. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup professionally applied, and her expression suggested that being in this courtroom was an inconvenience she would tolerate briefly before returning to her important life. Judge Judy examined both women from her bench, her legendary intuition already cataloging the dynamics at play. She had seen thousands of cases in her career. She could read people within seconds, and everything about Victoria Ashford's body language screamed entitlement so deep it had become invisible to her. Judge Judy began with her characteristic directness. Miss Ashford, the plaintiff claims you owe her $23,000 for 47 custom dresses you commissioned and received. What's your response? Asterisk Victoria leaned forward, her voice smooth and rehearsed. Your Honor, this entire lawsuit is frivolous. I hired Mrs. Rodriguez to produce quality garments for my brand, and what she delivered was completely unacceptable. The workmanship was poor, the materials were cheap, and I had to scrap the entire collection because it didn't meet my standards. If anything, she should be paying me for wasting my time and damaging my brand reputation. Asterisk. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed. You're saying 47 dresses were completely unusable? Absolutely. I couldn't sell a single one. They looked like they were made by someone who learned sewing from YouTube videos. I had to start over with a legitimate manufacturer. Elena's hand trembled slightly as she clutched her folder. She had spent 8 months of her life on those dresses. Every stitch was precise. Every seam was perfect. She had given Victoria Ashford the best work of her career. Judge Judy turned to Elena. Mrs. Rodriguez, tell me about these dresses. Elena spoke carefully, her accent present, but her words clear. Your Honor, I have been making clothes for 32 years. I learned from my grandmother in Mexico. I have dressed brides, celebrities, and business executives. Never in my life has someone called my work unacceptable. I put everything into those dresses. I show you. She opened her folder and began placing photographs on the evidence table. Detailed shots of every dress, including close-ups of the stitching, the beading, the structural elements that demonstrated master craftsmanship. Judge Judy examined the photos with genuine interest. These look professionally made to me. High quality. Mrs. Rodriguez, did Miss Ashford express any complaints during the 8 months you worked on this project? Elena shook her head. No, Your Honor. Every time she came to see the dresses, she said they were beautiful. She said I was amazing. She posted on Instagram about finding a secret weapon for her brand. She called me a genius. Judge Judy turned back to Victoria. Miss Ashford, did you post on Instagram about Mrs. Rodriguez's work? Victoria's composure flickered almost imperceptibly. That was before I saw the final products together as a collection. Individually, they seemed fine, but when I put them together for the launch, I realized the quality wasn't consistent. Elena reached into her folder again. Your Honor, I have the Instagram posts. She pulled out printed screenshots. This one says, just saw my first batch of samples, and I'm literally crying, they're so beautiful. This one says, my seamstress is magic, and everyone's going to want to know her name. This one says, Ashford Elegance is going to change the fashion game forever. All thanks to the most talented woman I've ever met. The courtroom murmured. Judge Judy examined the screenshots with raised eyebrows. Miss Ashford, these posts don't sound like someone dissatisfied with the quality of work. They sound like glowing endorsements. Victoria's lawyer whispered something in her ear, but she waved him off, her temper beginning to surface. Your Honor, social media is performance. Everyone knows that. I was building hype for my brand. Of course I'm going to say positive things publicly. That doesn't mean I was satisfied behind the scenes. Judge Judy leaned forward. So you're admitting you lied to your followers about the quality? That's not what I said. Victoria's voice rose slightly. I'm saying there's a difference between marketing and reality. Everyone in business knows that. Elena spoke quietly but firmly. Miss Ashford never complained to me. Not once, but she did make many demands. She changed designs 15 times. She rejected fabrics I had already purchased and made me buy more expensive ones with my own money. She called me at midnight with new ideas. She asked me to work faster and faster because her launch date kept moving up. I did everything she asked. Everything. Judge Judy's expression hardened. Mrs. Rodriguez, you spent your own money on materials that Miss Ashford demanded? Yes, Your Honor. $14,000. I have the receipts. She was supposed to reimburse me, but she never did. She said it would be included in the final payment. So you're actually owed $37,000? $23,000 for the work plus $14,000 for materials? Elena nodded, her eyes glistening. Yes, Your Honor. But I only asked for the $23,000 in my lawsuit. I thought maybe I made a mistake with the fabrics. I thought maybe I should have said no. I blame myself. Judge Judy removed her glasses, a gesture that signaled she was moving from information gathering to judgment. Mrs. Rodriguez, never blame yourself for someone else's dishonesty. You performed your contracted work. You went above and beyond. And you deserve to be paid. Victoria's lawyer finally spoke. Your Honor, with respect, we have quality control documentation showing the dresses failed to meet industry standards. Judge Judy extended her hand. Let me see it. The lawyer approached with a folder and handed over several papers. Judge Judy examined them for about 30 seconds before looking up with an expression of complete disbelief. Miss Ashford, this quality control report is dated 3 weeks ago. That's correct, Your Honor. Victoria's confidence returned slightly. We had an independent assessment done, Judge. Judy's voice dropped to ice. Mrs. Rodriguez delivered these dresses 8 months ago. You're telling me you waited 7.5 months to have them inspected? Where were the dresses during that time? Victoria hesitated. A fatal pause that told Judge Judy everything she needed to know. They were in storage. We were busy with other projects, so these dresses sat in storage for over 7 months. And now you're claiming they're defective? The quality would have been the same regardless of when we tested them. Judge Judy shook her head slowly. Miss Ashford, I've been doing this for 25 years. Do you know what I see here? I see someone who used Mrs. Rodriguez's labor, waited until the statute of limitations was almost up, and then manufactured a quality complaint to avoid payment. And the most telling detail is the timing. You got this quality control report done 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Rodriguez filed her lawsuit 4 weeks ago. You didn't claim these dresses were defective until after you got served. That's not a quality issue. That's a cover-up. Victoria's carefully constructed calm finally cracked. Your Honor, that's completely unfair. You're not even considering my side of the story. I'm considering the evidence, Miss Ashford. And the evidence tells me you're lying. Asterisk, the word lying echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Victoria Ashford's face flushed crimson, her composure shattering completely. No one spoke to her like that. Not her employees, not her business partners, not even her father. She had spent 28 years being told she was exceptional, brilliant, destined for greatness. And now this television judge was calling her a liar in front of cameras that would broadcast her humiliation to millions. Your Honor. With all due respect, Victoria's voice trembled with barely contained rage. You don't know who you're dealing with. My father is Charles Ashford. We own half the commercial real estate in the city. We have lawyers who eat cases like this for breakfast. You're making a very big mistake by treating me like some common defendant. Judge Judy's response was delivered with the kind of deadly calm that came from decades of experience with exactly this type of person. Miss Ashford, I'm going to give you one chance to reconsider that statement, because threatening a judge is never a good strategy, and invoking your father's name in my courtroom is meaningless. And here, you're not an heiress. You're not a celebrity. You're not your father's daughter. You're someone who owes money to a working woman who spent 8 months making dresses you never paid for. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but her lawyer grabbed her arm hard enough to make her wince. He whispered urgently in her ear, and whatever he said made her close her mouth and take a deep breath. Judge Judy continued. Now, I want to understand something else. Mrs. Rodriguez, you mentioned that Miss Ashford came to your shop to pick up the dresses. What happened during that final visit? Elena's expression shifted, becoming guarded and pained. Your Honor, I don't want to make this personal, Mrs. Rodriguez. Everything in this courtroom is relevant. What happened? Elena took a breath. Miss Ashford brought a photographer that day. She said it was for the brand launch. She wanted photos of the dresses on display in my shop. I thought she was grateful. I thought she wanted to showcase where her brand began. Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Elena continued. But then she started making comments. At first, I thought she was joking. She pointed at my equipment and said it looked like something from a museum. She told the photographer to make sure he didn't get the ugly parts of my shop in the shots. She laughed about the neighborhood, about how she couldn't believe she had to come to this part of town. Asterisk. Judge Judy's expression remained neutral, but her eyes had hardened. What else? Elena's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. She asked her photographer to take a picture of my hands. Close up. She said she wanted to show her followers what cheap labor looked like. She said she wanted to prove that quality and class didn't have to come from expensive sources. That even someone like me could make something beautiful if given proper guidance. Someone like you? Judge Judy repeated. What did she mean by that? Elena looked down at her hands, the same hands that had created 47 masterpieces, the same hands that bore scars from decades of needles and scissors and hot irons. I think she meant someone old. Someone immigrant. Someone who doesn't look like her or talk like her. The courtroom fell absolutely silent. Even Victoria's lawyer seemed to shrink away from his client. Victoria erupted defensively. That's completely taken out of context. I was complimenting her. I was saying that even without formal training, even without a fancy studio, she could produce decent work. I was being nice. Judge Judy's voice cut through Victoria's excuse like a blade. You were being nice by photographing her hands as an example of cheap labor? I didn't mean it that way. Then how exactly did you mean it, Miss Ashford? Please explain to me the kind interpretation of photographing an elderly immigrant woman's hands and calling it cheap labor. Victoria had no answer. For perhaps the first time in her life, she had no polished response, no Instagram caption, no PR-approved explanation. She sat in silence, her face alternating between anger and confusion, as if she genuinely couldn't understand why her words were problematic. Elena spoke again, her voice stronger now. Your Honor, that was not the worst part. There's more. After she made those comments, after she took those pictures, she told me that payment would be processed within 2 weeks. She shook my hand. She smiled. She left my shop with all 47 dresses. And then she blocked my number. Judge Judy turned to Victoria. You blocked her? I was busy. Victoria's excuse sounded weak even to her own ears. I get hundreds of calls and messages every day. I had to manage my contacts, Elena continued. When I couldn't reach her by phone, I went to her office. I told you what happened. Her security guards made me leave. But before they took me outside, I heard Miss Ashford talking to her assistant inside. She didn't know I could hear. What did she say? Elena's eyes met Victoria's for the first time since the trial began. She said that she would never pay $23,000 to a Mexican grandmother who should be grateful for the exposure. She said my dresses would sell for $300 each, and she would make over $100,000 profit. She said by the time I could afford a lawyer, the statute of limitations would expire and I would have nothing. The courtroom erupted. People who had been quietly watching suddenly couldn't contain their reactions. Gasps, whispers, someone saying, "Oh my God," loud enough to echo. Judge Judy held up her hand for silence, her face now completely transformed into something cold and immovable. Miss Ashford, is that what you said? Victoria's lawyer tried to intervene. Your Honor, that's hearsay. Judge Judy shut him down immediately. Miss Ashford, answer the question. I don't remember specifically what I said in a private conversation months ago, but you don't deny saying something along those lines? Victoria's silence was an answer in itself. From the back of the courtroom, a voice suddenly spoke. She said exactly that. I was there. I heard everything. Every head turned toward the source. A woman stood up from the last row, someone who had been sitting so quietly and invisibly that no one had noticed her throughout the entire proceeding. She was in her early 60s, elegant but understated, with silver-streaked dark hair and an expression that mixed profound sadness with steely determination. Victoria's face went white. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Judge Judy addressed the woman. Ma'am, you need to identify yourself if you want to make a statement. The woman walked slowly down the center aisle, her eyes locked on Victoria. My name is Isabella Ashford. I am Victoria's mother, and I am here to tell this court everything about the daughter I raised and the monster she has become. Asterisk. The courtroom seemed to freeze in that moment. Victoria stared at her mother with an expression that cycled rapidly through shock, confusion, and naked fear. Her lawyer whispered urgently, but Victoria wasn't listening. Her entire world had just narrowed to the woman walking toward her. Isabella Ashford stopped in the center of the courtroom, equidistant between her daughter and Elena Rodriguez. Up close, the resemblance was unmistakable. The same bone structure, the same dark eyes. But where Victoria's face was expertly made up and arranged into a mask of entitled indifference, Isabella's face showed every emotion she was feeling without filter. Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, but I cannot sit silent any longer. Judge Judy studied the woman carefully. Mrs. Ashford, are you here to defend your daughter or condemn her? Isabella's voice was steady but heavy with emotion. I am here to tell the truth. Something no one in my daughter's life has ever required of her, including myself. Victoria found her voice at last, high-pitched and desperate. Mom, what are you doing? This is a public trial. There are cameras. You're going to embarrass the whole family. Isabella turned to face her daughter directly. Victoria, I have been embarrassed by you for years. I have just been too much of a coward to say it. Judge Judy leaned forward. Mrs. Ashford, you said you were there when your daughter made those comments about Mrs. Rodriguez. Can you tell us exactly what you heard? Isabella nodded slowly. I was in the hallway outside my daughter's office. She didn't know I was there. I heard her laughing with her assistant about how she had tricked Mrs. Rodriguez into working for 8 months, with no intention of ever paying her. She called it brilliant strategy. She said poor people were easy to manipulate because they were always desperate. The courtroom murmured again. Victoria looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Isabella continued. But that was not the first time I heard my daughter speak that way about people. It was simply the first time I decided to do something about it. Judge Judy asked quietly. Why now? Why did you decide to come forward at this particular moment? Isabella's eyes glistened with tears she was fighting to contain. Because I saw that video of Mrs. Rodriguez at the security desk. Someone filmed it and posted it online. They thought it was funny. A Mexican grandmother getting thrown out of a fancy building, clutching papers and crying. Thousands of people laughed at it. My daughter laughed at it. She showed me that video and said, Mother, watch this. This is what happens when people don't know their place. Alana's hand went to her mouth. She had no idea a video existed. Isabella's voice cracked. And in that moment, I saw my own mother. My mother who came to this country with nothing. My mother who worked as a seamstress just like Mrs. Rodriguez. My mother who was mocked and dismissed and treated like she was. Worthless because she had an accent and brown skin and hands that knew real work. Victoria's face had gone from white to green. She looked physically ill. Isabella turned to address the courtroom more broadly. Very few people know this, but I was not born into wealth. I met Charles Ashford when I was cleaning rooms at the hotel where he was staying. I was 22 years old, working 14-hour days, sending money home to my family in Guatemala. Charles and I fell in love. He married me despite his family's objections. He gave me a life I never dreamed possible. She paused, gathering herself, but somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I became so focused on fitting into his world that I forgot where it came from. I raised my daughter surrounded by luxury, but completely disconnected from the values my own mother taught me. I let her believe that money made her better than other people. I let her think that workers like Mrs. Rodriguez existed only to serve her convenience. Victoria finally spoke, her voice raw. Mom, stop, please. You're destroying everything. No, Victoria. You destroyed everything. I'm trying to rebuild some small piece of my soul. Judge Judy addressed Victoria directly. Miss Ashford, do you understand what's happening here? Your own mother is testifying against you. Your own mother is ashamed of the person you've become. Victoria's tears were flowing now, ruining her perfect makeup. She doesn't understand. She's never understood what it takes to succeed in business. Everyone does what I did. Everyone looks for advantages. Not everyone exploits vulnerable people, Miss Ashford. Not everyone refuses to pay for services rendered. Not everyone mocks immigrants who do honest work with their hands. Isabella moved closer to Elena, stopping directly in front of her. Mrs. Rodriguez, I want to apologize to you personally. Not as Victoria's mother, but as the daughter of a woman just like you. When my daughter called your hands cheap labor, she was calling my mother's hands cheap labor. When she laughed at you being removed from that building, she was laughing at every immigrant woman who ever came to this country seeking a better life. Elena looked at Isabella with compassion that was almost difficult to witness. Mrs. Ashford, you did not do these things. Your daughter did, but I created her. I raised her. I protected her from consequences when I should have let her face them. Every time she was cruel, every time she cheated someone, every time she looked at a working person with contempt, I looked away. I told myself it was just a phase. I told myself she would grow out of it. I told myself that success required a certain ruthlessness. She turned back to Judge Judy. Your Honor, my daughter has hurt many people throughout her life. She plagiarized papers in college and let another student take the blame. She crashed a car while drunk and let her boyfriend claim he was driving so her record would stay clean. She fired personal assistants without severance pay at least a dozen times. She has never faced a single real consequence for any of these actions because her father and I have always stepped in with lawyers and money and connections. Victoria was sobbing now, all pretense of composure abandoned. Mom, you're supposed to be on my side. That's what family does. Isabella's response was calm but devastating. No, Victoria. That's what enablers do. And I'm done enabling you. Judge Judy spoke into the heavy silence that followed. Mrs. Ashford, I appreciate your candor. It takes courage to testify against your own child. But I need to ask you directly, what do you want to see happen here? Isabella didn't hesitate. I want my daughter to pay Mrs. Rodriguez every penny she owes, plus damages for the humiliation and distress she caused. I want her to issue a public apology, not something written by a PR team, but genuine words from her own heart. And I want her to learn what it means to work, really work, with her hands, like Mrs. Rodriguez does. Judge Judy nodded slowly. Mrs. Ashford, you can take a seat. Isabella walked to the gallery and sat down near Elena's supporters, deliberately distancing herself from her daughter. Judge Judy removed her glasses and set them on her bench with careful precision. Miss Ashford, I've seen a lot of entitled defendants in this courtroom, but you're something special. You exploited a vulnerable woman's labor. You publicly humiliated her. You tried to manufacture a false quality complaint to avoid paying for work you clearly received and profited from. And you did all of this while believing your family name would protect you from any accountability. Your Honor, Victoria's voice was barely audible. I made mistakes. I see that now. Can we discuss a settlement? Judge Judy's response was immediate and absolute. We're past settlement, Miss Ashford. Judge Judy's words hung in the air like a final verdict before the actual verdict. We're past settlement? Victoria Ashford sat motionless, her perfect facade now a ruin of smeared mascara and trembling lips, facing something her billions had never prepared her to encounter. Real consequences with no escape hatch. Miss Ashford, I find in favor of the plaintiff. You owe Elena Rodriguez the full contracted amount of $23,000 for the 47 dresses you commissioned and received. Victoria's lawyer began scribbling notes frantically, but I'm not finished. Judge Judy's voice carried the weight of 25 years of watching privileged people try to escape accountability. You also owe Mrs. Rodriguez $14,000 for the material costs she paid out of her own pocket at your specific demand. Materials you approved, materials you required, materials you never reimbursed. That's $37,000. Victoria whispered, as if saying the number out loud made it more real. I'm still not finished. You owe Mrs. Rodriguez an additional $50,000 in punitive damages for emotional distress, intentional humiliation, and the deliberate pattern of exploitation your own mother just testified to witnessing. Victoria's lawyer shot to his feet. Your Honor, $50,000 in punitive damages is excessive for a contract dispute. Judge Judy's response was immediate and withering. This stopped being a contract dispute the moment your client called Mrs. Rodriguez cheap labor and mocked her immigration status. This stopped being a contract dispute when your client deliberately blocked her number and had her physically removed from a building. This stopped being a contract dispute when your client bragged about waiting out the statute of limitations while an elderly woman struggled to afford legal representation. What we have here is predatory exploitation of a vulnerable worker, and I will not minimize that with a token judgment. The total amount is $87,000. Victoria's voice cracked. I don't have that kind of money accessible right now. Judge Judy almost laughed. Miss Ashford, you're wearing $12,000 on your feet. You drove here in a vehicle worth more than Mrs. Rodriguez's entire annual income. You post daily about luxury purchases that most Americans couldn't afford in a lifetime. You have the money. You're just not accustomed to spending it on obligations rather than indulgences. Elena Rodriguez sat quietly through all of this, her face showing neither triumph nor vindication. Just a kind of weary relief that her story was finally being heard, that someone in authority believed her. Judge Judy addressed Elena directly. Mrs. Rodriguez, you've conducted yourself with dignity throughout this proceeding. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't seek revenge. You simply wanted to be paid for the work you performed. That's the mark of a true professional. Elena nodded, too emotional to speak. Judge Judy continued. I'm also ordering Miss Ashford to issue a public video apology within 72 hours. This apology must include a full acknowledgement of what she did, specific recognition of Mrs. Rodriguez's skill and professionalism, and a commitment to never exploit workers in this manner again. This video must remain posted on all of Miss Ashford's social media platforms permanently. Any deletion will result in contempt of court charges. Victoria looked up, her eyes hollow. Everyone will see. My brand will be destroyed. Judge Judy's response carried no sympathy. Your brand was built on exploitation, Miss Ashford. It deserves to be destroyed. Maybe the next business you start will be built on honesty instead. Isabella Ashford rose from her seat in the gallery. She didn't ask permission to speak. She simply began walking toward the front of the courtroom again, and something in her bearing made everyone, including Judge Judy, wait to hear what she had to say. Your Honor, I want to add something to these proceedings. Not as Victoria's mother, but as someone who has benefited unfairly from the Ashford family's wealth and influence for 30 years. Judge Judy nodded for her to continue. Isabella reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I've already spoken with my husband about this. Charles Ashford is not a perfect man, but he is not the person my daughter has become. When I told him about this case, about what Victoria did, about the video of Mrs. Rodriguez being humiliated, he was horrified. We both were. She handed the envelope to Judge Judy, who opened it and examined the contents with widening eyes. This is a certified check for $500,000, Isabella said, made out to Elena Rodriguez. It represents our family's apology for Victoria's behavior and our recognition that Mrs. Rodriguez deserves far more than the court can reasonably award. The courtroom erupted. Elena stood up from her chair, her hand pressed to her heart, unable to process what was happening. $500,000 was more money than she had earned in her entire career. It was enough to pay off her shop, to help her children and grandchildren, to retire with dignity if she chose. Victoria stared at her mother with an expression of utter betrayal. You're giving her our money? She should be grateful we're paying anything at all. Isabella turned to face her daughter, and the love that had softened her voice throughout the proceeding was now gone. Victoria, our money came from people like Mrs. Rodriguez, tenants who paid rent to live in our buildings, workers who cleaned our properties, immigrants who took the jobs no one else wanted because they were trying to build better lives. Every dollar you've ever spent was earned by someone else's labor. And you've never once acknowledged that? You've never once been grateful? Victoria's face crumbled completely. She looked like a child who had just realized that the world she understood was built on lies. Isabella continued. Your father and I have also decided to restructure your trust fund. You'll no longer receive a monthly allowance. Instead, you'll be required to work for the Family Foundation's job training program. You'll spend the next 2 years helping people like Mrs. Rodriguez find employment, develop skills, and build businesses. You'll learn what honest work means. And maybe, if you're very fortunate, you'll become someone worth respecting. You can't do this. Victoria's voice was hoarse. I'm your daughter. That's exactly why we're doing it. Because we love you too much to let you become what you're becoming. Isabella's voice finally broke. When I saw that video of Mrs. Rodriguez being dragged out of your building, I saw myself. I saw my mother. I saw every immigrant woman who came to this country dreaming of something better. And I realized that my daughter had become the exact type of person we all feared. The person who sees us as less than human. I cannot let you become that person, Victoria. Even if it means losing your love. Elena Rodriguez rose from her seat and walked slowly toward Isabella Ashford. The two women stood face to face, separated by worlds of experience, but connected by something deeper. Understanding. Mrs. Ashford. Elena said quietly, I don't want your money. The courtroom fell silent again. Elena continued. The $87,000 your daughter owes me, yes. That I earned. That represents my work, my time, my life. But $500,000 for something I didn't do? That would make me no better than the people who take what they don't deserve. Isabella looked at Elena with a kind of wonder. Then what would you accept? Elena thought for a moment. Give it to other workers who've been exploited. Start a fund for seamstresses and domestic workers who don't have money for lawyers. Help people like me get justice when rich people try to cheat them. That would honor my work. That would make this mean something. Isabella embraced Elena. Two women from completely different worlds, finding common ground through shared values. Judge Judy watched this exchange with an expression that those who knew her well would recognize as genuine emotion. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than usual. In all my years on this bench, I've seen the worst of human nature. I've seen greed, cruelty, and entitlement that would make most people lose faith in humanity. But I've also seen moments like this. Moments where the right outcome is bigger than what anyone expected. Mrs. Rodriguez, you came here seeking $23,000. You're leaving with $87,000 in court-ordered payments and the knowledge that your courage inspired a transformation in an entire family. I hope you understand how remarkable that is. Elena nodded, tears streaming down her face. I just wanted to be paid for my work, Your Honor, and that's exactly what made you extraordinary. You didn't want revenge. You didn't want to destroy anyone. You just wanted fairness. In a world full of people reaching for more than they deserve, your simple request for what you earned made you a hero. Judge Judy's gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the courtroom. Court is adjourned. As people began to file out. Victoria Ashford remained seated, staring at nothing. Her mother sat beside her, not touching, but present. The journey to redemption would be long and painful. But it had finally begun. Elena Rodriguez walked out of that courtroom into sunshine, surrounded by supporters who had watched a Mexican grandmother with scarred hands defeat a billionaire's daughter through nothing but truth and dignity. 3 months later, the Isabella Ashford Foundation for Worker Rights launched with an initial endowment of $5 million. Elena Rodriguez sat on the board. Victoria Ashford worked in the mailroom. The 47 dresses that started everything were eventually returned to Elena. She donated them to a museum exhibit about immigrant contributions to American fashion. Each dress now hangs alongside a placard, telling the story of the woman who made it, the woman who tried to steal it, and the justice that finally prevailed. Sometimes the right story doesn't need a dramatic ending. Sometimes it just needs an honest one, justice served. A family transformed. And one woman's hands, the same hands that were mocked as cheap labor, now celebrated as the hands that changed everything.